All right, good evening. We are on Daf Samaches Amud Beis, which probably corresponds to 68b2. I'm getting the nod. 68b2 it is. And we are about 16, 18 lines down. Rabbi Shimon Litzarf Heter Ve'Isser. If you recall yesterday, and if you don't, you can always go back and watch it to remind yourself. We had a brisa that had a list of cases. We had a circumstance where we had a mixture of prohibited truma item, truma leavening agent mixed in that fell into dough, and chulin, non-truma leavening agent that fell in. We had another case where one fell in after the other, and then we had another case where wine fell onto beans. And so we wanted to know why we needed all three of those cases. Wine falling into beans was to tell us that even when that we hold that if the prohibited item, if it becomes if it creates a negative flavor immediately, then there's still an argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, the Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon, on whether that's permissible or whether it's not permissible. We said that in the circumstance where one fell in and the after one fell in, we said even if it winds up causing a delayed reaction, right? They argued. And then we had this other case where one fell in and the other fell in, and they said to Rabbi Shimon, you have to agree with us, right? You have to agree with us that although eventually the flavor is bad, at the beginning, the flavor from the truma mixes together with the flavor from the chulin, and although there's double the leavening agent that you need, initially it rises in half the time, and that's pretty good. So it should be a case where it's a good positive, and then it only becomes negative later, in which case you should agree with us that it's prohibited. Rabbi Shimon says, no, not so. He says that when it becomes, Rabbi Shimon, the last thing we had said, that what is causing the dough to rise? A combination of the positive and the negative. So you can't call the positive all positive and the negative all negative, because the two of them are acting in concert together. So therefore, all of you can't look at the truma and say that's all a positive reaction, and the chulin creates the negative. In combination, they create the positive negative reaction. So therefore, he considers it to be prohibited. Now they want to know, the Rabbi Shimon, litzarf heter ve'isser b'hadi hadadi ve'litzer. Why doesn't Rabbi Shimon hold that at the end of the day, you're combining a prohibited item and a permitted item, and your claim is that since it's a prohibited item and a permitted item, you can't say that all of the bad comes from one item versus the other. You have to put them two together. Fine, so combine them together and say that in combination, the two are prohibited. So the answer is Rabbi Shimon l'tameh. Rabbi Shimon goes according to his own reassoning. Da'amar, he holds afilu iser ve'iser nami lo mitzarfi. If you have two prohibited items, even those don't combine together. Ditznan, as we learned in the Mishnah, ha'orla v'kilai ha'kerem mitzarfin, that there's a disagreement. Let's say I have a prohibition of eating orla, the first fruits of trees that grow, and then kilai ha'kerem, I have a prohibition of eating fruits that grew in a field together with grapes. So both of those are separate prohibitions. So the first opinion says that you're going to combine it together, right? And going to create, now you've got a mixture between those two prohibitions. One eats those, you have a full prohibition. And Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, no, those are two different prohibitions, and they don't combine together. So Rabbi Shimon is the opinion that says these two items don't combine together, and since they don't combine together, he also doesn't combine together the permissible item and the prohibited item. Okay, let's go back into a new, yeah.
Is that only if it's like Orla and Kalan, it's only if they're mixed together? Or is it if they're eating together?
If you have enough of one, it would be prohibited. If you have enough of the other, it's prohibited. The issue here is that you have half an amount of one and half an amount of the other. Oh. So now I'm mixing the two of those two things together, right? So by mixing do the two mix, right? That's the issue. Rabbi Shimon says, no two things mix, right? And so therefore, when we're going to nullify them, right, we're going to need to have a large, right? We're going to nullify each of them in 200. He says, Each one is going to wind up getting nullified in 200 parts, in 100 parts. Sorry, 100 parts two against it. So he says you don't combine them together, and so therefore each one can be nullified with the same parts. Okay.
But it's saying it's a separate isra. It's not because of the flavor profiles.
No, it's not, because each of these things, correct. They're just two different prohibitions.
Okay.
Okay, next case. One time, there was a mouse that fell into a barrel de-shichra of beer. Okay? Ew, exactly. So Asrei Rav lahu shichra. So Rav says this beer is no good, right? You've got a flavor of mouse, of nevela, right? Into, it's a sheretz even, right? In this beer, it's prohibited. Amrua Rabbanan kamed Rav Sheshes. So the Rabbanan said this in front of Rav Sheshes, and they say, Nema kasavar notein tam lifgam aser. Let's say that Rav must hold that if it gives a negative flavor, it's still prohibited, right? And that shouldn't be, because we said that it gives a negative flavor, it should be permissible. Mice don't give positive flavors to wine. So Amar Lahu Rav Sheshes biyama savar Rav notein tam lifgam is mutter. Really, normally Rav agrees. A negative flavor is permissible. V'hacha chidushu, and here it's a novelty in that deha mice, that it's disgusting, right? Mice, dead mice, are disgusting in themselves. Ubedili inshimine, and so nobody's going to come and drink this beer anyway. V'afilu hachi asrei rachmana. Nevertheless, right? A mouse is disgusting. Nobody's going to come and eat the mouse. And nevertheless, the Torah has a prohibition and says, don't eat the mouse. So therefore, why does the Torah tell us that? The Torah is telling us, despite that fact that I already wouldn't eat it, the Torah comes in and says, don't eat it again, to tell me that there's a circumstance where with a regular food, I would be allowed to eat it. This, I can't even eat it under that circumstance. And therefore, hilkach nosein tam lifgam nami aser. Therefore, when it comes to a mouse, even if it gives a bad flavor, it's still prohibited, right? Because giving a good flavor, nobody's going to touch it anyway. It's disgusting.
So the same thing like making a tanan that you're not going to eat on Yom Kippur.
Meaning because you're it's. I hear where you're coming, because ultimately, what is your preference matter, right?
Yeah, exactly. Not allowed to anyway.
So the answer here is that the distinction is that this is a universal thing that everybody finds repulsive, right? So since everybody finds it repulsive, clearly the Torah doesn't have to tell me not to eat it, because I wouldn't eat it anyway. Right. So therefore, if the Torah is telling me not to eat it, the Torah is telling me don't eat it even in a circumstance where you can eat something else. So therefore, even if it gives a bad flavor, you can't eat it. Amrulei Rabbanan Rav Sheshes. The Rabbanan said to Rav Sheshes, Elomeata, if that's true, litama lach v'yavesh, right? So what should happen is that there are certain things, let's say a mouse carcass, for example, is one of these things that if it is moist, right? If it's completely dried up, I guess it's been sitting around for a while and it's all dried up, so then it does not transfer tuma of a dead sheretz, right? It doesn't anymore. But if it is, only if it is moist, like it has some kind of, I guess, moisture to the body, then it can transmit tuma. So why shouldn't it be, if what you're saying is true, that you have to stay, that people naturally are going to have an aversion to a dead mouse, right? So therefore, the Torah tells us, I would already stay away from a dead mouse. The Torah says, stay away from a dead mouse, it's tameh. Why? To tell me that even a dried up mouse is tameh, right? It should be the same logic. One additional step. Alama tanan, but we learned in Mishnah, metamim lachim ve'in metamim yeveshim, that when it comes to the dead mice, right, they are only going to transmit impurity if they are moist, not if they're dry. Okay? Ulatamech, now according to your reason, shechva zera tetame lach v'yavesh. So semen also has the same characters, has the same rules of tuma, right? If the semen transmits tuma as well, and it only transmits tuma if it is moist. If it's dried up, it's already not existent anymore. So therefore, your rationale should apply the same way, and it should be right that since people are averse to that anyway, that liquid anyway, So therefore, they're going to stay away from it. Why does the Torah have to tell me that you'll become tummy if you touch it? In order to tell me, even if it's dry, right? So that's the same logic. Lama tnan, why do we learn in a Mishnah? Mitamin lachin ve'ein mitamin yeveshin. That it only transmits tumah when it's moist, not when it is dry. Ella ma islach lememar. What do you have to say here? Shechva zera amar rachmana beruya lahazriya. The answer is because the Torah goes out of its way to say that shechva zera is called shechva zera, the seed, right? Semen is called the spilled seed. So why is it called seed? Because it has the ability to cause a pregnancy. However, right, if it is dried up, then it no longer has that ability. Therefore, it's no longer in the category of shechva zera. It's no longer viable semen if it is all dried up. Therefore, it doesn't transmit tumah. Even though your logic is sound, the logic is there, that the Torah telling me to state that shechva zera transmits tumah should tell me that it even includes that which is dry. Nevertheless, since the Torah calls it shechva zera, it has no ability to create a pregnancy once it's already dried out. Therefore, it's not going to transmit tumah. Hachinami. So here in the case about the mouse too, b'mosam amar rachmana ke'ein mosam. The Torah says that the transmission of tumah, of impurity, by a mouse is when it's dead. When it first, which we interpret as the way a mouse is when it dies, which has some moisture, right? A regular mouse doesn't dry up and it's not a dried up carcass immediately after it dies. So therefore, the Torah is specifying that a reasonably fresh mouse carcass, that is the tumah. That's what transmits tumah, okay? But otherwise, no. But the logic is sound. Therefore, since the logic is sound, we understand what Rav is saying, that if the taste of a mouse is bad, it still ruins makes the beer in the barrel prohibited, right? Maskif lo Rav Shimi min Nardai. So Rav Shimi from Nardai asked the question, Omi mice, who tells you that mice are disgusting? Right? Not true. V'alo olal shulchan shel malachim. There are certain kings, they had considered it a delicacy, right? I don't know if there's my 80s movies references, but there was a movie, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and they all had bugs for dinner, right? You can Google it. So you see that the monkey brains and all that, right? So this is, the kings had mice. So Amar of Shimi min Nardai, so Shimi from Nardai says, Lo kasha. That's not a problem. Ha bidadabra, ha bidamasa. You're talking about field mice and city mice. Field mice, those are wild mice, so those are delicious. But the city mice, those little rascals that get into your house, those are disgusting. Nobody likes those. Rashi says, Achbar didabra, what is a field mouse? Rashi calls it a squirrel. So I presume that the field mice are not really mice, they're squirrels. Oh. And I don't know, squirrels.
They might be delicious.
Yeah, it might be delicious. I feel like that is hillbilly, right? That is a hillbilly's a dinner, right? That's exactly right. Exactly, next to the possum. Yeah. This guy, so. Amar Rava says, Hilchasa, the halacha is, no sein tam lefgam is mutter. The halacha is that a bad flavor gets imparted, it's permissible, as we said. The achbara v'shichra lo yadana my time in the Rav. And as far as the mouse in the beer, we don't know why Rav said that. We don't understand for we don't know. Imishum kasavar nosin tam lifgam aser. It might be because he has a generality that he holds, not like our halacha, that he holds against that, and he holds that even negative flavors prohibit the item. V'leis hilchasa kavasei, the halacha is not like him. Imishum kasavar nosin tam lifgam mutter. Or is it that he agrees that generally speaking, negative flavor is permissible? V'achbara b'shichra ashbuchi mashbich. But a mouse in beer, maybe it makes it taste better, right? That's also a possibility. Okay, iboilu. So we ask the next question. Nafal legov chala mai. Let's say a mouse falls into vinegar. Now, vinegar is acidic, and so the mouse's body doesn't last long in the vinegar, right? It's going to dissolve. Yeah, it's going to dissolve in there. So now what's the halacha there? So Rav Hillel, Amarli Rav Hillel the Rav Ashi. So Rav Hillel says to Rav Ashi, Hava uvda be Rav Kahana. There was a story like that happened in Rav Kahana's house. The also Rav Kahana said it was prohibited. Because there it's not just flavor the potential is that you've got pieces of mouse in the vinegar. And that, yeah, exactly. It was gross before it gets worse. Amaleahu imratuti imrotate. So Rav Ashi said to Rav Hillel, right? It's not right. This is the reason why is not because of a flavor issue, right? That rationale is because the mouse is going to dissolve, and you could wind up getting a piece, right, of a mouse, which when it comes to a sheretz, a dead sheretz, the tuma amount, the problematic amount is ka'adasha lentil size, which is a very small size, right? Even a very small, it's not even a kazayas. So therefore, even a very small size, it could be potentially detrimental. So therefore, that's why.
Like a fly? Fly
So fly, same thing, fly, ant, all of those we're going to wind up. We learned that as long as you eat the whole thing, right, then it could be a problem. Right, you don't even need a kazayas of those things. But if you're eating in small, if those things dissolve and you're not eating the whole thing, so then you're right. It's probably not going to be as bad. But shrutzim are more strict, right? So it has a very small shear, so that's why even dissolved it could be problematic. So that's why he said it's prohibited. Ravina savar l'seuri b'meya v'chad. So Ravina thought, if you've got 100-to-1 ratio, right? If you've got 100 times the volume of the mouse in the vinegar, so then that's going to nullify it, right? Because we have a principle of nullification in certain amounts. 100-to-1 should nullify that mouse, right? Because Amar, he said, logara mitruma. It's not any worse than truma, whatever prohibitions are involved with truma. And ditnan, we learned in a Mishnah, truma ola be'echad b'meya. That if you have some truma that falls into non-truma, it gets nullified in a volume of 1 to 100. So Amar Rav Tachlifa Bar Giza l'Ravina. So Rav Tachlifa Bar Giza said to Ravina, Dilma ketavlin shel truma bekedera dami. Delo batal tamayu. He says that's not necessarily true. Who says it's not like a truma spice in a pot? Because there, the flavor doesn't get nullified. Because even if you put small amounts of spice into a large pot, the spice is still tasted throughout the cooked dish. Maybe that's the same thing with the mouse. Rav Achai shir bechala bechamshin. So Rav Achai said, actually, vinegar is way stronger. So therefore, in order to nullify this mouse, you really only need 1 in 50, a 1-to-50 ratio to nullify it, right? You don't need nearly as much as you need to nullify truma. Rav Shmuel Braid Rav Ika Shir B'Shichra B'Shisin. Rav Shmuel, the son of Rav Ika, said the volume to nullify that mouse in beer is 1 to 60. V'Hilchasa, and the halacha is Idi V'Idi B'Shisin. The halacha is the nullification amount for non-kosher prohibited items in kosher items is 1 to 60. Right? That's where we get our batal b'shishim rule. 1 to 60, v'chein kol yisurin shebatorah. That is the rule by all of the prohibitions in the Torah that they are except, of course, chametz on Pesach is not the case. Chametz on Pesach is prohibited in a mashu in the smallest amounts, right? So chametz is the exception to that. But otherwise, other prohibitions, this is a 1 to 60 ratio is enough to nullify. Okay, so that's good. Next Mishnah. Ove kochav shahayim ma'avir im Yisrael kadayayin mimakom l'makom. Let's say there was a non-Jew, and he was carrying with a Jew barrels of wine from one place to the other. Im haya becheskas hamishtamer mutter. If the barrels are under watch and supervision, so then they're fine. Im hodio shehu maflig. Now, if the Jew says to the non-Jew, I've got to separate for a little bit. Kedei sheyishtom v'yistom v'yigov. Right, I'm going to be away for enough time that the non-Jew is going to be able to have enough time to be able to puncture a hole in it, right? And then he can fill the hole back up and the hole with clay, and then it's going to dry so that the Jew comes back and it's undetectable, right? As long as he says to him, I'm going to go away, I'm going to go, I have to go check on something, I'll be back in a couple hours.
The Jew tells
the non-Jew, right? So then that is going to be Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer. So and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says kedei sheyiftach es hachavis v'yigof v'tignof. The amount of time that he has to give the non-Jew is longer. It has to be enough for him to actually take the whole top off and then reseal it. right? Not just drill a hole. And we'll see what their argument about is. But if he tells the non-Jew, I'm going to be away, the non-Jew says, oh, great, if he's going to be away for that long, then I can taste the wine, right? I can open it up and try it. So then it becomes problematic. So it has to be, don't tell, right? Don't tell him. I'll be right around, I'm just going to use the washroom. I'll be right back in a minute. And then go away for an hour, it's fine, right? But if he tells him that he's going to be away for a couple hours, that's where it gets into problems. Okay. Hameniach yeno bikaron obesfina, right? If a person puts his wine into some kind of a wagon or into a boat, v'halach lo bekapandria, and then he goes to a shortcut. Nichnas lemedina, he gets into the city. V'rachatz, right? And then he goes to a bathhouse. Mutter, then the wine is fine, right? He didn't tell him that he was going to be away. So that's what we said, that's fine. If he leaves and he tells him that he's going to be away for enough time for him to drill a hole in it, or according to Rabbi Gamliel, enough to be able to open the barrel, then that's going to be prohibited. Sounds similar? We'll see in the Gemara why. Right? The next case is somebody leaves a non-Jew supervising wine in the store. Even though the storekeeper is going out and coming in, it's mutter, it's fine, right? The storekeeper could be taking care of the other customers, right? He's got the Chinese guy in the back making the sushi, Japanese guy in the back making the sushi, sorry about that, right? Making the sushi, that is mutter, that's fine, because the Japanese guy is not going to dedicate the wine to his Avodah Zara because he's coming in and out all the time. But if he tells him again, and he gives the guy enough time to drill a hole in the barrel and then to seal it up and let it dry, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, gosh, I guess I'm getting a cold. If he gives enough time to open the barrel and to seal it again, and then the opening is undetectable, that would be enough time. Then it would be prohibited. Now they're eating together, having a meal together. And they have their wineskins on the table, right? Velogin al hadulavki. Or he's got his wine next to the table, right? That they place the serving cart. And veinichu, and he leaves the wine there, right? It's accessible. The non-Jew can certainly reach it. V'yatza, and he leaves. Mash al shulchan aser, whatever's on the table is prohibited, right? Because the non-Jew he can help himself. Whatever's on the table has already been served, so he can help himself. She'al hadulavki mutter. But whatever's on the serving tray that's next to it, he's not going to help himself to without permission. That's permitted. That stuff is permitted. V'im amar lo, and if he says, having mozog v'shosa, he says, help yourself, pour some wine, enjoy yourself, I'll be right back, right? So then afshal hadulavki, also then even what's in the serving area is going to be prohibited. Because he already knew that he can help himself to the wine that's on the table. So when the Jew is telling him, go ahead and help yourself to wine, so that must mean that he's giving him whatever's in the cabinet, whatever's there ready for him to serve. Chavios psuchos, if he's got open barrels, asuros, so then those are going to be prohibited. Stumos, if they're sealed, mutaros, those are permissible. Kadesh yiftach v'yigov v'tigov, until he tells him that there's enough time for it to be opened and resealed. Then it becomes problematic. The non-Jew may have done that.
Worried about him putting something there by mistake? Or
just touching it.
Just touching it.
If he touches it, that's going to prohibit the wine, right? All he's got to do is open it, give it a taste, and now you're stuck.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Interesting.
Says the Gemara, Heichi dami. We said that if the non-Jew knows that it's being watched, then it's acceptable. So what does that mean, that the non-Jew understands being watched? Can it tell you like we in a brisa? If, let's say, te'onin, if the person has his donkeys and his workers, and they are pulling, right, and they're doing their job, right, they're holding something that's tahor, and afilu hiflig, even if the Jew separates from them, hiflig mehan, yoser mi mil, even if the guy goes in front of them a mil in order to be able to scout the way, tarosov taharos, all of the things that were tahor are considered still tahor. We're not worried that the non-Jew opened it up, or in this case, doesn't even have to be an Am Haaretz, doesn't even have to be a non-Jew, right? Because when it comes to Tuma, right, even in Am Haaretz transmits Tuma because we presume that he has touched things that are Tameh, and he hasn't gone to the mikvah. So he could be Tameh. So we don't have to worry about the taharos, because you're going around the corner. If he says to them, go ahead, I'm going right after you, going right after you guys, then as soon as they're out of sight, tarosov tameos becomes tameh. Because once you told him that I'm not going to be able to see you, don't worry, keep going, I'll catch up, then as soon as they're out of sight, then you don't know what the person did to it. Maishno Reisha, Maishno Sefer. What is the difference between the two circumstances? So Rav Yitzchak says, Reisha b'metayr chamarav upal of the kach. He says, must be the first case is, he told all of his workers and all the people to go to the mikvah before they took the trip. We're handling Torah items, go to the mikvah. Well, ihachi, if that's true, Sefer Nami, ein ha'aretz makbid, so he says, if the ihachi Sefer Nami. Well, if that's the case, then why in the second case where he doesn't see where the guy went, of course, that's going to be Torah anyway. What's the worst thing? He's going to open it up. He's going to touch it. It's not a big deal. He's Torah already. So the answer is no. Ein am haaretz makbid al maga chaveru. The answer is because we don't know who this am haaretz is going to meet on the way. He can meet his best buddy, and you're not there watching. And his best buddy didn't go to the mikveh beforehand, so he touches it, and that's going to ruin it. Ihachi, if that's the problem, afil reisha nami, then that should be this case in the first case also. It should be the same thing. The first case should be the same thing, that even if you told him, I'm watching you, I'm going ahead, then his friend's coming. Why would he think to tell his friend he can't touch it? So, Nema Hachi Amarava. So we have to say, this is what Rava says. This is what he means. Samach Tesam Abeis. Bebolahem Derech Aklaton. Right? We're talking about where the person is going to come through some kind of a pathway, right, from the side. And so therefore, he's going to pop in and catch them in the act. And right, we says, I'm going to go ahead and around, and the person thinks he's ahead, but he doesn't know whether the guy's going to double back on him and catch him in the act. Therefore, he won't open it. Right? If he tells him, I'm not going to be watching you for a while, then he will open it. So that's the difference. Ihachi, if that's the difference, Seifa Nami, then in the second case, Kevin de Amar Lehem Lechuva Ani Ba'acharechem Samcha. So he says, what? Even if he says to them, I'm going to be behind you. So then also we should be concerned that he's going to double back also. So the answer is, Samcha Dataihu. They are sure, right, that the Baal Bayis is not going to see it anymore, right? Because he's behind them. And he told them, I'm going to be behind you. So therefore, that's where they take their own liberties, and that's where you have problems, right? So being watched means that you don't know when the owner is going to come back at any time. Then we had the case where somebody leaves an idol worshiper in his store. We had the case where he leaves his wine in the wagon or on the boat. I need all of these cases. If you told me about the non-Jew in the store, so then desavar dilma asi v'chazile, so the non-Jew might think, I can't touch this wine because maybe the owner is going to come, he's going to catch me. But in a wagon or in a boat, ema demaflik le lisfinse ve'ovid ma'debai. He's going to think, I'm on my boat, I'm on my wagon, the Jew's not here. It's not like being in the same store with me that the Jew's going to come in at any moment and catch me. I don't think he's going to catch me on my wagon or on my boat, so the guy might do whatever he wants. V'itana bekarno besfina. So if you told me that it is permissible in the wagon or the boat, mishum desavar dilma asi beurcha chrisi, it's because the guy doesn't know what direction he's coming from. He might come from a different road that is a shortcut. V'koi aguda v'chazili is going to catch me in the act. Avolo v'kochav bechanuso, but in the store, ema achid li lebava. So the guy will think, well, I'll just lock the door in the room that I'm in, v'avid kol deboy, and I'll do whatever I want. Kamash that no, in both circumstances, as long as he's worried that he's going to get caught, he doesn't fool around with the product. Okay, so either circumstance.
And if he does, is there any kind of penalty?
If he gets caught. If he gets caught, right? If he gets caught, then he's got to pay for it.
He's got to pay for it.
So therefore, since he doesn't take the risk to get caught, then as long as we know he's worried about getting caught, it's fine. But the problem is going to be when he is confident that he's not going to get caught. Then he'll take liberties. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana says, Rabbi Yochanan machlokes b'shel sid. This argument, right, the argument that we had is, how long does the Jew have to say he's going to be away for? Enough time, we said, on the one hand, we had one opinion that said, enough time that he can drill a hole, seal it up with clay, and then let it dry. The other opinion was he's going to take the whole lid off the barrel and put it back on and then reseal the whole barrel with clay. So what's the argument about? Rabbi Yochanan says the argument is if the lid is made out of plaster, because the plaster dries quickly enough, and when it dries, it looks identical to the plaster that was there before. So you wouldn't be able to detect that there was a hole there. If he drilled a hole in the top and then sealed it up with plaster, it would look like the rest of the top, which is also plaster. Aval b'shel tit, but if it's clay, divrei hakol kedei sheyiftach v'yigov. Then if it's clay, it has to be, everyone agrees that he has to open the barrel, because drilling a hole in clay and then sealing it up, that clay is going to look different than the clay that was there. It's not going to dry the same. It's going to clearly look like there was tampering. Therefore, the only way that a non-Jew would be able to think that he could get away with the tampering is if he takes the lid off and reseals the whole thing all over again with clay. Then the whole seal is replaced. That he could get away with, but that means it's going to take longer. So the question about whether you have to wait long enough to be able to take the seal off, the whole lid off the barrel and reseal it, or whether it's enough to be able to be away for the non-Jew to drill a hole, that's only if it's plaster, not if it's clay. Meisvei. So he asked one question. Amar Shimon Gamliel said to the Chachamim, "V'alo stumo nikar bein milmala bein milmata." He says, the opening, right? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says to the Chachamim, I don't understand. The opening is visible from the top and from the bottom, right? Why would drilling a hole, according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, drilling a hole is not a problem. We don't have to worry. The non-Jew's not going to drill a hole because they'll get caught too easily. You'll be able to see the hole that got drilled. So now, if we're talking about clay, yes, then I understand what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is saying. It looks different on the top. Machloka, so b'shel tit machlokas hainu dekatani stumu nikar bein mimal meumata. I understand why Rabbi Shimon Gamliel would say it's too risky. He's going to get caught. Eliyamar b'shel sid machlokas, but if what the interpretation is what you just said, that it was dealing with plaster, so b'shel melamata. So I understand underneath the barrel, because yediyah, that will be known. Why? Because if you have a hole in the top and you put a layer of plaster over the top, you can smooth the top, but with the barrel closed otherwise, you can't smooth the bottom, which means as soon as the Jew flips the lid open, he's going to see that there was a hole drilled through, right? So therefore, right, I understand why it would be visible from the bottom, el-lamala, but what is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel saying that it's visible from the top? Halo yediyah. So there's no visible sign. There's no way for you to know when it comes to plaster. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel who delo yada Mike Amri Rabbanon. What happened was Rabbi Shimon Gamliel didn't understand what the Rabbanon were suggesting. Right, when the Rabbanon said you leave him alone enough time to drill a hole, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said, wait a second. If you drill a hole in clay, then it's visible from the top and the bottom. This is what he's saying. Ibishel tit kam risu. If you're talking about drilling a hole and the top is made out of clay, stumo nikar bein mimal bein milmata, then the hole is going to be visible from the top because it's not going to dry the same, and from the bottom because it won't be smoothed. V'ibishel sid, and even if it is from plaster, kam risu, that's what you're talking about. Nehi dilamala lo yediyah lamata miha yediyah. So fine, he might not have it visible from the top, but underneath it will be visible. So the Rabbanon will say, Kevan dilamala lo yediyah, since the top of the barrel with plaster is not, you can't detect the difference. So lo mesik adate de opik v'chazile. The non-Jew is fairly confident that when the Jew flips the lid of the barrel off, he's not going to look on the bottom of the barrel and inspect it to see. So he'll just open. He's counting on the fact that the Jew's just going to go, great, I flipped the lid off and throw it away. He's not going to check the inside of the barrel. Inami, or also zimnin decholim. Sometimes he fills in the hole, and it actually comes out very neat on the bottom, even without smoothing. So the non-Jew figures it's worth the risk, right? It's going to do. So that's what he does. Amar Rava, Rava says, halach Reb Shimon Gamliel. The halacha is like Reb Shimon Gamliel. Hoel utnan stoma kavase, because there's a Mishnah that says his opinion without any arguments. Titnan, we learned in the Mishnah. Haya ochel al shulchan imo, right? The last part is that he was eating on the table with him. V'niach login al shulchan, and they leave their wineskins on the table. Login al adulovki, or wine on the serving cabinet that was nearby. V'hiniach, and he leaves it. V'yotza, and the Jew leaves. Mashal shulchan is osir. Whatever's on the table is prohibited. Mashal adulovki mutter, whatever's in the cabinet is permissible. Now, v'im amar lo, if he says to him, havi mozug v'shoseh, right? Go ahead and pour yourself whatever you want. Avshal adulovki osir. Even what is in the cabinet is prohibited. Now, chavios psuchos asuros. Then we said barrels that are sealed are open are prohibited. Stumos, those that are closed, mutaros, are permissible. Kedei sheyiftach v'yigov v'tigov, as long as that you told him that you didn't give him enough time to be able to take the whole lid off. Now, at the end of the Mishnah, it doesn't say this is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's opinion. It just says, as long as he doesn't take the lid off, that's when it's permissible, not as long as he doesn't drill a hole. So pshita, that's a great point. That's pretty obvious, though. It's written right in the Mishnah that the answer is going to be that he has to be able to tell him enough time to be able to take the whole lid off. No, Ma'odatema, what would you have thought? Kula Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Tanila. This whole thing is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's opinion, right? It's just a whole long statement of Shimon Gamliel. Kamash Malon. So therefore, his point is that no, it's not a statement of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. This is a statement according to everybody, and everyone agrees with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel at the end of the day that the whole lid has to be able to come off. So if that's the case, at the end of the day, we're holding like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, and therefore we are not worried about him drilling a hole. The non-Jew's not going to drill a hole, right? Because he's going to worry about getting caught. The hilchos kavasi Rabbi Eliezer, and the halacha comes out according to Rabbi Eliezer, de lo chayesh le ziyufa. We're not worried about forgery. When they would seal the barrels, they would sign right in the barrel, like put a little COR symbol. Well, according to Rabbi Eliezer, non-Jews are not going to be able to forge that. We're not worried that you're coming back and he's resealed it and forged. So that means he can't drill a hole because Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says he wouldn't drill a hole. He'll get caught. And Rabbi Eliezer says he wouldn't open the barrel because he'll get caught. So ha'idna, my time lo masvin and chamber b'yudei ovrei kochavim. So then what's the problem with leaving wine with non-Jews? They're not going to drill holes and they're not going to open it. So it should be fine. So the answer is, mishum shaika. The answer is because there is a possibility that the non-Jew might get wine through the air hole. What they would do is they would drill a very small air hole in the lid because the fermentation, as the wine ferments, the gases escape. And if you don't leave a little air hole, so then the whole barrel is going to explode. So they would drill a little hole, right? That little hole, the non-Jew might stick a straw through and get to the wine that way. But if you had a fully closed bottle of wine, yeah, it wouldn't be a problem, right? That's how we hold ourselves now, right? The fully closed bottles of wine, it's not an issue. Non-Jew, not worried that the non-Jew is going to take the foil wrapping off, pull the cork, take a drink, put the cork back in, and reseal it with forged foil. That's not happening. Okay, Amar Rava. Rava says, Zona ovedes kochavim veYisrael mesubin etzla. Let's say some Jews are doing the wrong thing. They're having a party, and they've got some non-Jewish prostitutes there, and the Jews are hanging around with her. The wine that's at the party is okay, even though you've got some non-Jewish prostitutes. Why? Because nehida takif lehu yitzra de avera, because the what's it called? Even though the prostitutes are so involved in business, right? They're dealing with there's nus. Yitzra de yain nesech lo takif lehu. They're not worried about the wine, right? They're not sitting there getting involved with the yain nesech. Why not? Okay. Now the reverse. Zona Yisraelis. If the prostitute is a Jewish woman, ve'ovdei kochavim mesubin, and the non-Jews are the ones sitting around there, Chamra asr, then the wine is prohibited. My time, but what's the reason? Hol vezila alayhu basraihu geriro. The answer is, since she's already been cheapened by them, they're not worried about her, right? So then they are going after the wine, right? So therefore, that is where the wine is not kosher. And so she shouldn't drink it. Okay, now bunch of cases, right? Bunch of cases that we're going to have with non-Jews being left alone with wine and deciding whether they're permissible or not. Ahu bisa dehava Yosef bechamra d'Yisrael. There was a house that there was wine that a Jew had. Al ove kochavim that a Jew had. It was a non-Jewish. It was a non-Jew's house, and the non-Jew goes in. Achda ledasha be'apei. So he closed the door. The non-Jew went into the house, and he closed the door. V'hava biza b'dasha, and there was a little crack in the door, and the person could see through the crack of the door what was going on inside a little bit. Ishtaka chovei kochavim dekai beini dani. And he sees the non-Jew is standing there with the barrels of wine. Okay? So that's all he sees. Now, he can't see all the barrels of wine all over the place. You can only see what's visible in the crack. So Rava says, Kol dilahadi biza shari, the haigisa v'haigisa aser. Whatever the Jew can see through the crack, so he knows what the non-Jew is doing in there, that's permissible. Because he can see if the non-Jew is opening the barrels or not. Whatever he can't see, though, that's prohibited. He's locked out. The non-Jew is going to do whatever he wants. That's prohibited. Okay, that's in that first one. Hahu chamra d'Yisrael. There was a story of wine that belonged to a Jewish person. Dava Yosef beisa, dava dar Yisrael bel Yona v'ovei kochav b'tachtona, that was in an apartment building. The Jewish person lived upstairs. The non-Jew lived downstairs. Now, to get from upstairs to downstairs, you had to go into the downstairs apartment and go up the stairs to the second floor. Okay, so that's what he had to get to. So the Jewish person lives upstairs. Shamu kal tigra nafki. So they heard some kind of noise outside, and they go running outside to see what it is. Right. So kadim asa ove kochavim. So achda lidash rape. So the non-Jew, he's finished watching whatever was going on outside. He went back inside, closed the door, and locked it. Okay, so the wine is now inside with the non-Jew. So Rava says chamra shari. The wine inside is permissible. Why? Because Meimar Amar, we're going to say kihechi dekadim asai anakadim v'asa Yisrael v'yasib el Yona v'kachazile. He doesn't know if the Jew went back inside or not. He was so busy paying attention to whatever was going outside. He went back inside, closed the door, and locked it. But as far as he's concerned, he doesn't know if the Jew is inside or outside. So therefore, as far as he's concerned, the Jew could come downstairs at any moment and catch him with the wine. So he's not going to do anything. Hahu ushpiza dehava Yosef bechamra d'Yisrael. There was a lodging place, right? I guess a hotel kind of a place that had Jewish wine that was there. Ishtakach ovek kochavim dehava Yosef beidani. They found a non-Jew who was by the barrels of wine that was there. Amarava, Rava says, Im nitfas alav keganav shari. If the non-Jew was trespassing and he would have been arrested for being in that location, then the wine is permissible. Because the non-Jew was too nervous. He wasn't going to be there for very long. He wouldn't have opened the barrels. The ilo, but if not, let's say the non-Jew had permission to be there. He's an inspector, hotel inspector, whatever. And somebody comes and goes, what are you doing back here? He goes, I'm just looking through your barrels of wine, make sure you've got how many you've got, right? So then usher. Then it's prohibited because we don't know how long he's been there. And that's going to be our rule for the next bunch of cases, right? If the non-Jew is fearful of getting caught, we presume he hasn't been there for long and he wouldn't tamper the bottles, he wouldn't tamper with the wine.
Yeah, why couldn't you just say that in the cases previously? Like,
essentially, that is what we said, right? We said, right, when he's on the way, when he's the reason why the wine got ruined in our Mishnah is because he told him what he was doing, right? Oh, just don't tell him. Okay. I'll be back in 4 hours. That's great. Now you've ruined it, right? Don't tell him. Hahu bisa, there was a house, dehava Yosef bechamra, that there was wine in there. Ishtakach ove kochavim, dehava koim beidani. They found a non-Jew that he was by the barrels of wine. Amar Rava says, Iis le lishtemute chamra osir. So he said, if the non-Jew is able to come up with an excuse for why he is reasonably able to be there, then the wine is prohibited. Velo, and if not, chamra shari, then the wine is permissible. Meisve, so he asked the question. Nanal hapundak, right? Let's say they lock up, right? I guess he was in some sort of a hotel or something like this, and they lock it up, and the non-Jew's there, right? Or Osha Amar Lo Shmur, or he tells him, guard this wine, right? So then the wine is prohibited, right? So maybe this isn't a circumstance where even if he can't come up with any reason why, the guy's guarding the door, he has no reason for walking inside, and we're saying that even nevertheless, it's still prohibited, and the wine is ruined. So the answer is lo, but no, it has to be, again, same answer. Still has to be a circumstance where the non-Jew has some kind of excuse that he has for going in there. There was a Jew and a non-Jew. They were sitting together and they were drinking some wine. Shama Yisrael kol teluye be kinishta. The Jew heard that they were starting to daven in the shul. So he got up and he left to go daven. Amar Rava says chamar shari. The wine is fine. Meimar Amar Hashta Midkar Leilachamre v'Hadarasi. Why? Because the non-Jew might think, oh, he'll remember he forgot his wine. He'll come back at any second and get it. He doesn't know how long mincha takes, so therefore it's permissible. There was a Jew and a non-Jew that they were sitting on a boat. Shama Yisrael called Shipure de Shemshi. The Jew heard the shofar blasts indicating Shabbos was coming. So the Nafak V'Ozel, so the Jew left. Right? He left the boat, got off the boat, went to go celebrate Shabbos. Amar Rava says, Chamra Shari, the wine is permissible. Why? Meima Amar Hashta Midker Lechamre V'Hadar Asi. The non-Jew figures the guy could come back at any second. Just what's Shabbos is going to stop him from checking on his wine. Now, V'imi Shum Shabsa, what about Shabbos? The non-Jew knows it's Shabbos. He knows the guy's not coming back. Ha'amar li Isser Giura, Isser the Ger told me, he was a convert, and he told me, Ki avinan ba'ar miyuson, when we were Arameans, you know what we used to think about the Jews? He confirmed that we don't have to worry about Shabbos. Amrinan Yehudoi lo minteri Shabbos. We thought Jews don't really keep Shabbos. Because to eat minteri Shabbos, if Jews really kept Shabbos, kama kisi ko mishtachi b'shukah. You know, you would find wallets all over the place in the streets. Jews would get caught in the marketplace, not realizing it's Shabbos. They can't carry. They'd have to drop their wallets wherever they were, and we'd be able to pick up all the wallets. So clearly, Jews don't keep Shabbos. Therefore, that's the supporting what we said about the boat. The non-Jew's not going to think the Jew's not coming back because of Shabbos, because non-Jews don't think Jews keep Shabbos, right? But what he didn't know is the Svira law in Rabbi Yitzchak is that we hold like Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Hamotzi kis b'Shabbos. If somebody is caught with his pocketbook outside on Shabbos, Molicho pachos midal amos. You can walk less than 4 amos and stop. Walk less than 4 amos and stop, and that's not carrying. Okay.